When my daughter-in-law handed me the business card of the best financial advisor in the state, I thought she was finally showing some genuine concern for my future. The card was embossed, expensive-looking, with gold lettering that read, Stephanie Chen, Senior Wealth Management Consultant. What I didn't know was that this caring gesture would lead to the systematic theft of everything I worked 40 years to build. I'm sharing my story because silence protects predators, and I refuse to be silent anymore. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning Diane brought up the financial advisor, I was in my garden tending to the roses I'd planted when Richard and I first bought this house 38 years ago. Richard had been gone for 2 years now, and the garden was one of the few places where I still felt his presence. The early morning dew clung to the petals, and I was carefully pruning the bushes when I heard her voice calling from the back door. Eleanor? Are you out here? Diane stepped onto the patio wearing designer yoga pants and a crisp white blouse that probably cost more than my entire week's grocery budget. At 41, she maintained the kind of polished appearance that came from regular spa treatments and personal trainers. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, and even at 8 in the morning, her makeup was flawless. Just finishing up with the roses, I said, straightening up and brushing the dirt from my gardening gloves. Did you need something, dear? I wanted to talk to you about something important. She settled into one of the patio chairs, crossing her legs in that precise way she had, like every movement was choreographed. Daniel and I have been worried about you. My son Daniel was her husband, my only child, and the center of my world since the day he was born 39 years ago. Hearing that he was worried about me sent a small spike of anxiety through my chest. Worried? About what? Diane leaned forward with an expression of concern that seemed genuine enough. About your finances, Eleanor. You're living alone in this big house, managing everything by yourself. Daniel says you've never been particularly good with investments or financial planning. Richard always handled all of that, didn't he? The comment stung, though I tried not to show it. It was true that Richard had managed our investments and retirement accounts. He'd been an accountant, meticulous with numbers, and I'd been happy to let him handle that aspect of our lives while I focused on raising Daniel and working part-time as a school secretary. But that didn't mean I was incompetent. I've been managing just fine, I said, keeping my voice even. The life insurance and Richard's pension are enough for my needs. But are you really maximizing those assets? Diane pulled out her phone, tapping the screen with one perfectly manicured nail. Daniel and I have been working with an incredible financial advisor, Stephanie Chen. She's helped us triple our investment portfolio in just 3 years. We thought maybe she could help you too. Make sure you're set up properly for the future. I removed my gardening gloves slowly, buying time to process what she was saying. Diane and Daniel lived in a sprawling house in the wealthy part of town, drove luxury cars, and took exotic vacations several times a year. Daniel worked in pharmaceutical sales, making good money, but I'd always wondered how they afforded their lifestyle. Maybe this Stephanie Chen was the answer. I appreciate the thought, but I'm really not interested in taking risks with what Richard left me. It's secure where it is. That's exactly the problem, Diane said, her voice taking on a slightly impatient edge before she smoothed it over with a smile. Keeping everything in basic savings accounts and CDs means you're actually losing money to inflation. Stephanie specializes in conservative, safe investments for retirees. She could probably increase your income by 20 or 30% without any real risk. 20 or 30%. I thought about the roof that needed repairs, the property taxes that seemed to increase every year, the rising cost of everything. An extra few $100s a month would make life considerably easier. I don't know, Diane. I'm 73 years old. I'm not looking to get rich. I just want to maintain what I have. And that's exactly what Stephanie will help you do, but more efficiently. She stood up, placing a business card on the patio table between us. Just meet with her. 1 consultation. If you don't feel comfortable after talking to her, you don't have to do anything. But Daniel really thinks this could help you. And he'd feel so much better knowing someone professional was looking after your interests. The mention of Daniel wanting this swayed me more than any financial argument could have. Since Richard died, I'd felt the distance growing between my son and me. He was always busy, always rushing off to some meeting or event. Diane had become the primary point of contact. The one who called, who visited, who remembered my birthday. If this would ease Daniel's mind and maybe bring us closer, perhaps it was worth considering. All right, I said finally. I'll meet with her. But I'm not promising anything. Diane's smile widened, and she came around the table to give me a quick hug. You won't regret this, Eleanor. Stephanie is absolutely brilliant. I'll set up an appointment for next week. Does Tuesday at 10 work for you? Before I could answer, she was already texting on her phone, her fingers flying across the screen with practiced efficiency. I picked up the business card, studying the gold lettering and the prestigious downtown address listed beneath Stephanie's name. The card felt substantial, expensive, professional. All set, Diane announced. Tuesday at 10 at her office downtown. I'll drive you if you'd like. I can drive myself. I'm not that old yet. The words came out more sharply than I'd intended, and I saw a flash of something in Diane's eyes before her pleasant expression returned. Of course not. I just thought you might appreciate the company. Downtown parking can be a nightmare. She glanced at her watch, a delicate gold piece that I knew cost several $1,000s. I should get going. Pilates class at 9. Remember Tuesday at 10. This is going to be wonderful for you, Eleanor. You'll see. After she left, I sat in the garden for a long time, turning the business card over in my fingers. Richard had always been so careful with our money, so cautious. He'd grown up poor, the son of factory workers, and he never forgot what it was like to struggle. Every dollar we saved, every investment we made, had been part of his careful plan to make sure I'd be taken care of after he was gone. Was I being foolish, keeping everything locked away in safe, low-yield accounts? Or was I being wise, protecting what we'd built together? I looked at the roses, at the house Richard and I had filled with 38 years of memories, and felt the familiar ache of his absence. If he were here, what would he tell me to do? The following Tuesday arrived gray and drizzly, typical weather for our Pacific Northwest town in November. I dressed carefully in my best navy pantsuit, the one I'd worn to Richard's funeral and hadn't touched since. Looking in the mirror, I saw a woman who'd aged considerably in the past 2 years. My hair, once a rich brown, was now completely silver. The lines around my eyes and mouth had deepened. I looked like someone's grandmother, which I supposed I was, even though Daniel and Diane had never given me grandchildren despite my hopeful hints over the years. The drive downtown took 30 minutes, and Diane had been right about the parking. I circled the block 3 times before finding a spot 2 blocks from the address on the business card. By the time I reached the building, a modern glass structure that reflected the gray sky, my feet were already aching in the dress shoes I rarely wore anymore. Stephanie Chen's office was on the 14th floor, part of a suite that housed several financial service companies. The reception area was impressive, all leather furniture and abstract art, with soft jazz playing in the background. A young receptionist with a bright smile checked me in and offered me coffee, which I accepted gratefully. My hands were cold from the walk, and I wrapped them around the warm cup as I waited. Mrs. Morrison? A woman emerged from an interior office, hand extended, smile warm and professional. Stephanie Chen was younger than I'd expected, probably in her mid-30s, dressed in an elegant charcoal suit. Her handshake was firm, confident. Thank you so much for coming in. Diane has told me wonderful things about you. Has she? I managed to return the smile, though I couldn't imagine what wonderful things Diane would have said about me. We'd never been particularly close. Stephanie's office was spacious, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Rain streaked the glass, and I could see the bay in the distance, gray and choppy under the overcast sky. She gestured for me to sit in one of the comfortable chairs opposite her desk, and I noticed the wall behind her was covered in certificates and awards. MBA from Columbia. Certified Financial Planner. Various professional achievements I didn't fully understand, but that looked impressive. So, Diane mentioned you're recently widowed and looking to make sure your finances are properly structured for retirement. Stephanie opened a leather portfolio and clicked her pen, ready to take notes. Tell me a little about your current situation. What assets do you have, and what are your primary financial goals? For the next 20 minutes, I found myself explaining my financial life to this stranger. The life insurance payout of $300,000 sitting in a savings account. Richard's pension that provided $2,000 a month. Our house paid off, worth probably $400,000 in the current market. My own small pension from the school district. Social Security. It all sounded substantial when I listed it out, and I realized with some surprise that Richard and I had done well for ourselves. We'd never been wealthy, but we'd been careful, and it had paid off. Stephanie listened attentively, asking detailed questions, taking notes, nodding at appropriate moments. She had a way of making me feel heard, valued. When I finished, she sat back in her chair with a thoughtful expression. "Eleanor, may I call you Eleanor?" She waited for my nod. "You and your late husband did an excellent job building financial security. But I have to be honest with you. Right now, that money isn't working for you the way it could be. That $300,000 in a savings account is earning what? Maybe 0.5% interest."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"Something like that," I admitted. I didn't actually know the exact rate. Which means after taxes and inflation, you're actually losing purchasing power every year. That money is getting smaller in real terms, not growing. She turned her computer monitor so I could see the screen, pulling up a colorful chart. "Now, look at what happens if we move those funds into a diversified portfolio of conservative investments. Based on historical averages, we could reasonably expect 6 to 8% annual returns. Over 10 years, that $300,000 could grow to $500,000 or more." The numbers on the screen were compelling. I leaned forward, studying the projections, the upward trending lines that showed my money growing year after year. "But what about risk?" I asked. "I've heard stories about people losing everything in the stock market." "Absolutely valid concern," Stephanie said, her expression sympathetic. "That's why we don't put all your eggs in one basket. We create a diversified portfolio with a mix of stable dividend stocks, bonds, some real estate investment trusts, maybe a small percentage in precious metals as a hedge. The key is balance and proper management. And that's where I come in. I monitor these accounts daily, making adjustments as needed to protect your assets." It sounded reasonable. Intelligent, even. I thought about Richard, about how carefully he'd managed everything. Would he want me to just let our money sit in a bank, slowly losing value? Or would he want me to be smart about it, to make it grow? "What would this cost me?" I asked. "I assume you charge fees for your services." "My fee structure is very straightforward," Stephanie said, pulling out a document. 1% of assets under management annually. So on $300,000, that would be $3,000 a year, which works out to $250 a month. Considering the returns we're targeting, that fee essentially pays for itself many times over. $3,000 a year seemed like a lot, but if she was increasing my returns by 6 or 8%, it made sense mathematically. Still, something made me hesitate. Perhaps it was Richard's voice in my head. Always cautious, always careful. "I'd like to think about it," I said. "This is a big decision, and I don't want to rush into anything." "Of course." Stephanie's smile never wavered. "Take all the time you need." "But Eleanor, can I be frank with you? Diane mentioned you have some home repairs that need to be done, and you've been putting them off because of the cost. Imagine if your money was generating an extra $1,000 or $1,500 a month. You could take care of those repairs, maybe take that trip you've been dreaming about, live more comfortably. You deserve that after all your years of hard work." How did she know about the roof repairs? I must have mentioned them to Diane at some point, though I couldn't remember when. The idea of having extra income every month was tempting. Very tempting. What would be the first steps? I heard myself asking. If I decided to do this, what would the process look like? Stephanie pulled out another set of documents, and for the next hour, she walked me through everything. Forms to transfer funds, paperwork to establish accounts, documents granting her power of attorney over the investment accounts, so she could make trades on my behalf. It all seemed professional, legitimate. She explained that the power of attorney was standard practice, necessary so she could actively manage the portfolio without having to get my approval for every single transaction. "The markets move fast," she explained. "If I see an opportunity to protect your money or capitalize on a good investment, I need to be able to act quickly. But you'll receive monthly statements showing every transaction, every fee, everything that happens with your money. Complete transparency. By the time I left her office, I had a folder full of documents to review and a deadline of 1 week to make my decision. Stephanie walked me to the elevator, her hand on my shoulder in a gesture that felt almost maternal despite the fact that she was young enough to be my daughter. "I know this feels overwhelming," she said as the elevator arrived. "But I promise you, Eleanor, I'm going to take care of you the same way I take care of Diane and Daniel. You're family to them, which makes you family to me." The words warmed something in my chest that had been cold since Richard died. Family. When had I last felt like part of a family? Daniel was so busy with his own life, and Diane, while polite, had never really welcomed me into their inner circle. But here was this professional, successful woman calling me family, offering to help me secure my future. I drove home in a daze, the folder of documents on the passenger seat beside me. Once there, I made myself a cup of tea and spread the papers across my kitchen table, the same table where Richard and I had made every major financial decision of our marriage. I could almost see him sitting across from me, his reading glasses perched on his nose, his careful handwriting filling the margins of financial documents as he calculated and reconsidered every option. What would Richard think of all this? I closed my eyes, trying to hear his voice, trying to imagine what advice he'd give me. But the house was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the rain pattering against the windows. That evening Daniel called. It was rare for him to call during the week. He was usually too busy with work, so I was pleased to hear his voice. "Mom, Diane said you met with Stephanie today. How did it go?" "She was very professional," I said carefully. "Very knowledgeable. She's incredible, right? Mom, she's tripled our money in 3 years. Tripled it. I can't even begin to tell you how much that's changed our lives." His enthusiasm was evident, and I felt a small glow of pride that my son was doing so well financially. "Are you going to work with her?" "I'm thinking about it. It's a big decision, Daniel. That money is everything your father left me." There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his voice had a slight edge to it. "Mom, I know you're being cautious, and that's fine. But sometimes being too cautious is just as risky as being reckless. Dad would want you to be smart about this. He wouldn't want you struggling financially when there are simple ways to improve your situation." The implication that I was struggling stung a little. I wasn't struggling. I was managing just fine. But was fine really good enough? "Diane's been talking to Stephanie about your situation," Daniel continued. "She really thinks this could help you. And honestly, Mom, it would make me feel better knowing someone professional was looking after your money. I worry about you being alone with all those financial decisions." There it was again, that suggestion that I wasn't quite capable of managing on my own. Part of me wanted to argue, to defend myself, to point out that I'd been managing just fine for 2 years. But another part of me, the part that missed having Richard to lean on, that missed feeling like someone cared about my well-being, wanted to accept the help being offered. "I'll think about it seriously," I promised. "I'm going to sleep on it for a few days." "Don't take too long," Daniel said. "Diane mentioned something about some market opportunity that Stephanie thinks would be perfect for you. But it's time sensitive. Sometimes you have to act quickly on these things." After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, looking at the documents spread before me. Time-sensitive opportunity, professional management, family taking care of family. It all sounded so reasonable, so caring, so right. I signed the papers on Thursday, 3 days after my meeting with Stephanie. I told myself I was being smart, forward-thinking, taking control of my financial future. Diane came over to witness my signature on the power of attorney document, bringing a notary with her to make it all official. She hugged me warmly when it was done, telling me how proud she was that I was taking this step, how much better I was going to feel with everything properly managed. "You're doing the right thing, Eleanor," she said as she left with the signed documents. "You'll see. 6 months from now, you're going to be so grateful you did this." The money transfers happened quickly. Within a week, my $300,000 had been moved from my savings account into investment accounts managed by Stephanie. I received a thick packet of paperwork confirming the transfers, along with statements showing how the money had been allocated across various funds and investments. The names were unfamiliar to me, strings of letters and numbers that meant nothing, but the paperwork looked official and professional. For the first 2 months, everything seemed fine. I received monthly statements showing small gains in my accounts. Stephanie called once to check in, asking how I was doing and assuring me that she was monitoring everything carefully. Diane stopped by several times, always asking if I'd heard from Stephanie, always reassuring me that I'd made a smart decision. It was in the third month that I started to notice something odd. I was balancing my checkbook, something I still did by hand every month despite Richard's death, when I realized my pension check seemed smaller than usual. I called the school district's HR department, thinking there might have been an error. "No error, Mrs. Morrison," the pleasant woman on the phone told me. "You authorized a redirect of a portion of your pension to an investment account. See, I'm looking at the form here, signed by you and notarized. $500 a month is being transferred directly to," she paused, reading from her screen, "Chen Financial Management." My stomach dropped. "I never authorized that." "Well, the signature on the form is yours, and it was properly notarized. The transfer started 2 months ago. You should have received notification in the mail." After I hung up, I tore through my stack of mail, looking for anything from the school district. I found it buried in a pile of advertisements and catalogs, a form letter explaining that my distribution request had been processed. I glanced at it when it arrived, assumed it was just routine paperwork and set it aside. $500 a month. That was 24% of my pension. I hadn't authorized that. Had I? I tried to remember signing documents in Stephanie's office, remembered the stack of papers she'd had me initial and sign. Had there been something about pension transfers in there? I'd been so focused on the investment accounts, on the promises of growth and returns, that I might not have read every single form carefully. I called Stephanie's office immediately. The receptionist told me she was with a client but would call me back. She didn't. I called again the next day and the day after that. Each time I was told Stephanie would return my call, but she never did. By the end of the week, I was frantic enough to drive downtown to her office. The receptionist, the same cheerful young woman who'd greeted me so warmly at my first visit, looked uncomfortable when I arrived. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Morrison, but Stephanie isn't available today. She's at a conference. Then I need to speak with her supervisor, or someone else in the office who can help me. There's been some kind of mistake with my accounts." The receptionist glanced nervously toward the interior offices. "Let me see if Mr. Patterson is available. He's the managing partner." Mr. Patterson was a silver-haired man in his 60s who exuded the kind of expensive authority that came from decades in the business. He invited me into his office, listened politely as I explained my concern about the unauthorized pension transfer, and pulled up my account on his computer. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm looking at the documentation here, and I see your signature authorizing the pension redirect. It's all properly processed and notarized. Is there a specific concern beyond the authorization itself? I don't remember signing that form. I don't think I would have agreed to transfer part of my pension." He turned his monitor toward me, showing me a scanned image of a form with my signature clearly visible at the bottom. "That is your signature, isn't it?" I stared at the screen. It looked like my signature. But when had I signed it? I don't know. Maybe. There were so many forms. "I understand this can be confusing," Mr. Patterson said, his tone gentle but firm. "Managing investments involves a lot of paperwork. But I assure you, everything was done properly and legally. If you want to stop the pension transfer, Stephanie can help you process that request when she returns from her conference." "When will that be?" "Next week. I'll make sure she contacts you first thing Monday morning." I left the office feeling foolish and confused. Maybe I had signed that form. Maybe I just didn't remember. I was 73 years old. Perhaps my memory wasn't as sharp as it used to be. The thought terrified me more than the missing money. But Stephanie didn't call on Monday. Or Tuesday. By Wednesday, I'd worked myself into such a state of anxiety that I called Diane, hoping she could help me get in touch with Stephanie directly. "Oh, Eleanor, I'm sure it's just a miscommunication," Diane said, her voice soothing. "Stephanie is incredibly busy, but I'll text her right now and ask her to call you. Try not to worry. Your money is being well managed. That's what matters." "But I didn't authorize a pension transfer. $500 a month, Diane. That's a significant amount of my income." That does seem like a lot." Diane paused and I could hear her typing in the background. Although, now that I think about it, Stephanie did mention something to Daniel about maximizing investment contributions. Maybe she's putting that pension money into a tax-advantaged account or something. There could be a perfectly good reason for it. But shouldn't she have asked me first? You did sign a power of attorney giving her authority to manage your accounts. That was the whole point, remember? So she could act quickly on opportunities without having to get permission for every little thing. Every little thing. $500 a month was not a little thing to me, but I didn't know how to explain that to Diane, who probably spent that much on a single shopping trip. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me, and felt the weight of my isolation pressing down. Richard would have known what to do. Richard would have caught this problem before it started. But Richard was gone, and I was alone with documents I didn't fully understand and people I was supposed to trust but increasingly wasn't sure I could. The next morning, I did something I probably should have done weeks earlier. I drove to my bank and asked to speak with a manager. Janet Bradley had handled my accounts for 15 years, and she greeted me warmly when I entered her office. "Mrs. Morrison, how nice to see you. What can I help you with today? I need to understand some transactions that have been happening with my accounts." I pulled out my statements pointing to the transfers. I hired a financial advisor, and I'm not sure I understand everything that's happening with my money. Janet took the statements, her expression growing more serious as she reviewed them. "You transferred $300,000 to investment accounts?" "Yes, she's managing investments for me. But I'm concerned about some other transactions I don't remember authorizing." We spent the next hour going through everything. Janet pulled up my account history on her computer, and together we traced every transaction that had occurred since I'd signed Stephanie's paperwork. What we found made my blood run cold. In addition to the pension transfer I'd discovered, there had been 3 other transfers I wasn't aware of. Small amounts, $500 here, $1,000 there, moved into accounts I'd never heard of. When Janet tried to trace where those funds had gone, the trail became murky. The receiving accounts were listed as investment vehicles, but the documentation was vague. "Mrs. Morrison," Janet said carefully, "I think you need to contact your financial advisor immediately and get a complete accounting of where all your money is and what it's being used for. These transfers," she pointed to the ones I hadn't authorized, "they don't look right to me." "What do you mean they don't look right?" "I mean they're going to accounts that I can't verify are legitimate investment vehicles. And the amounts, the frequency, it looks more like someone is siphoning money rather than managing investments." She met my eyes, her expression grave. "I think you need to consider the possibility that you're being defrauded." The word hung in the air between us. Defrauded. Stolen from. Scammed. I felt the room tilt slightly, and Janet quickly reached across her desk to take my hand. "I'm not saying that's definitely what's happening," she said quickly, "but you need to protect yourself. First thing you should do is revoke that power of attorney. Then demand a full accounting from this advisor. And honestly, you might want to consult with a lawyer." I drove home in a daze, Janet's words echoing in my head. When I got home, I immediately tried calling Stephanie again. This time, when the receptionist started her usual deflection, I cut her off. "You tell Stephanie that if she doesn't call me back today, I'm contacting the police and a lawyer. Do you understand me?" My voice surprised me with its strength, its anger. The receptionist stammered something and put me on hold. 2 minutes later, Stephanie picked up. "Eleanor, hi. I'm so sorry I haven't gotten back to you. It's been an absolutely crazy week. I want a complete accounting of all my money. Every dollar, every account, every transaction. And I want it today." There was a pause. "Of course. I can email you a comprehensive report this afternoon. Is something wrong? You sound upset." "There are transactions I don't understand. Money being moved to accounts I never heard of. Money taken from my pension that I don't remember authorizing." "Oh, those." Stephanie's voice was smooth, reassuring. "Those are just standard investment consolidation moves. I'm gathering your funds into managed portfolios. It's all part of the strategy we discussed. We never discussed taking money from my pension. Actually, if you remember, we talked about maximizing your investment contributions. The pension redirect was part of that conversation. But Eleanor, if you're not comfortable with any of this, we can absolutely reverse those decisions. Your comfort level is what matters most to me." Her words were reasonable, her tone was caring, but something in my gut told me not to trust her. I want the report today. And I want to schedule a meeting to review everything face to face. Absolutely. How's Friday morning? 10 o'clock. After I hung up, I called Daniel. This time, I didn't sugarcoat my concerns. I think something's wrong with this financial advisor situation. Money is being moved around in ways I don't understand, and Stephanie isn't being responsive. Mom, Diane and I have worked with Stephanie for years. She's completely legitimate. Daniel sounded annoyed, like I was being difficult. You probably just don't understand the statements. Investment accounting can be confusing. I'm not confused, Daniel. I'm concerned. And my bank manager is concerned too. Your bank manager? His tone shifted slightly. What were you doing talking to your bank manager about this? Trying to understand where my money is going. I heard him sigh heavily. Look, Mom, I think you might be overreacting. But if it makes you feel better, why don't Diane and I come with you to your meeting with Stephanie? We can all sit down together and go through everything. Would that help? The offer seemed genuine, and I felt some of my anxiety ease. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe having Daniel and Diane there would help me understand what was happening. That would help, I admitted. Thank you. No problem. That's what family does. We look out for each other. As I hung up, I wanted to believe that was true. I wanted to believe that my son and his wife were looking out for me, that Stephanie was a legitimate professional, that my money was safe. But the knot in my stomach wouldn't ease, and that night I barely slept, Richard's voice in my head reminding me that if something seemed too good to be true, it probably was. Friday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of false spring day that sometimes appeared in late November, offering a brief reprieve before winter settled in for good. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple gray dress and the pearl earrings Richard had given me for our 30th anniversary. Looking at myself in the mirror, I tried to see what others saw. An elderly woman, perhaps a bit naive, certainly out of her depth in the world of high finance. But beneath that exterior was someone who had survived loss, who had raised a son alone after divorce, who had built a life with Richard that had been full of love and careful planning. I wasn't stupid, and I wasn't going to let anyone treat me as if I were. Daniel and Diane arrived at 9:30 to drive me downtown. Diane was dressed impeccably as always, in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Daniel wore slacks and a button-down shirt, looking professional but tired. I noticed the dark circles under his eyes, the tension in his jaw as he kissed my cheek in greeting. How are you holding up, Mom? He asked as we settled into his luxury sedan. The leather seats were soft, the interior spotless. Everything about their lives seemed so polished, so perfect. I'm fine. Just anxious to get some clarity about what's happening with my accounts. Diane turned from the front seat to look at me, her expression sympathetic. I completely understand your concern, Eleanor. Money matters can be so stressful, especially when you're not used to dealing with complex investments. But I promise once Stephanie walks you through everything, you'll feel so much better. She's amazing at explaining things in simple terms. The phrase simple terms rankled, but I kept my mouth shut. We drove in relative silence, Daniel navigating the morning traffic with practiced ease. When we finally found parking and made our way to Stephanie's office building, I felt my heart rate increase. This was it. Either I was going to get answers that would put my mind at ease, or I was going to confirm that something was seriously wrong. The receptionist greeted us warmly, recognizing Daniel and Diane immediately. She's expecting you. Go right in. Stephanie's office looked exactly as it had during my first visit. The same expensive furniture, the same view of the city and the bay beyond, the same wall of certificates and awards that proclaimed her expertise and success. She stood as we entered, coming around her desk with her hand extended and that professional smile firmly in place. Eleanor, Daniel, Diane, thank you all for coming in. Please sit down. Can I get anyone coffee or water? We all declined, settling into the chairs arranged in front of her desk. I noticed Diane and Daniel seemed completely at ease, while I felt like I was perched on the edge of my seat, ready to bolt or fight depending on what happened next. So, Eleanor, Stephanie began, her attention focused entirely on me, you had some questions about your account activity. I want to address all of your concerns. First, Let me pull up your portfolio overview. She turned her computer monitor so we could all see the screen. A colorful pie chart appeared, showing how my money was supposedly allocated across various investment categories. Stocks, bonds, real estate funds, commodities. It looked professional and legitimate, but the numbers didn't quite match what I remembered from my bank statements. As you can see, your $300,000 has been diversified across multiple asset classes to minimize risk while maximizing potential returns. Over the past 3 months, your portfolio has grown by 8%, which translates to about $24,000 in gains. 8% seemed high, incredibly high given what I understood about conservative investments. Can you show me the actual statements? The detailed transaction records? Of course. Stephanie clicked through several screens, pulling up dense pages of financial data. Rows and rows of numbers, dates, transaction codes. It was overwhelming, deliberately so, I suspected. Here you can see every trade that's been executed, every fee that's been charged, every dividend that's been received. I leaned forward, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. What about these transfers? These amounts going to accounts I don't recognize. Those are movements between sub-accounts within your portfolio. When I see opportunities to rebalance or shift assets for better returns, I move funds accordingly. That's what active management means. I'm constantly monitoring and adjusting to protect and grow your money. Sounded plausible. Daniel and Diane were nodding along, seemingly satisfied with the explanation. But something still felt wrong. And my pension? Why is money being taken from my pension every month? Stephanie's expression shifted to something almost maternal, patient and slightly condescending. Eleanor, we discussed this. You wanted to maximize your investment contributions. By redirecting a portion of your pension directly into your investment accounts, we're taking advantage of dollar-cost averaging and tax-efficient investing strategies. It's actually a very smart move financially. But I don't remember agreeing to that specific amount. $500 a month is a significant portion of my income. I understand it feels like a lot right now, Stephanie said, her voice soothing. But think long-term. That $500 a month invested properly will grow substantially over the years. You're essentially paying yourself first, prioritizing your future financial security. Diane reached over and patted my hand. Eleanor, when Daniel and I first started working with Stephanie, I had the same concerns. It felt scary redirecting so much of our income into investments. But look at where we are now. Our net worth has tripled. You have to trust the process. I looked at my son, hoping for some indication that he understood my concerns, that he was on my side. But Daniel was nodding in agreement with his wife, his expression suggesting I was being unnecessarily difficult. Mom, Stephanie knows what she's doing. She's been managing money professionally for over a decade. Don't you think she understands investment strategies better than we do? The implication was clear. I was out of my depth, questioning expertise I couldn't possibly understand. And maybe that was true. Maybe I was being paranoid and foolish. But I thought about Janet, my bank manager, and the concern in her voice when she'd suggested I might be getting defrauded. I want to see proof of these gains, I said firmly. Not just numbers on a screen. I want to see account statements from the actual financial institutions holding these investments. The room went very still. Stephanie's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Diane's hand on mine stilled. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Eleanor, Stephanie said carefully, the statements I'm showing you are the official records. These are generated directly from our trading platforms and custodial accounts. What other proof are you looking for? I want to log into these accounts myself. I want to see them directly, not through your system. That's not really how managed accounts work, Stephanie explained, her patience clearly wearing thin. You've given me discretionary authority to manage your investments. The accounts are in your name, yes, but they're accessed through our firm's platforms for security and efficiency reasons. So I can't access my own money? Of course you can access your money, but there are procedures we have to follow. Withdrawal requests, transfer authorizations. We can't have clients randomly logging into trading platforms and potentially making transactions that conflict with the overall investment strategy. Everything she was saying sounded reasonable, but the more she talked, the more trapped I felt. I looked at Daniel again, my last hope for support. Daniel, something doesn't feel right about this. Can't you see that? My son looked torn, glancing between me, his wife, and Stephanie. Mom, I think you're just not used to how professional investment management works. It's different from just having money in a savings account. Your son is right, Stephanie interjected. And I understand this is a learning curve for you. Tell you what, why don't we schedule a follow-up meeting next month, and I'll have even more detailed documentation prepared. In the meantime, try to trust the process. Your money is growing, which is exactly what we want. I felt dismissed, patronized, shut down. The meeting wrapped up quickly after that, with Stephanie standing and extending her hand, effectively ending the discussion. As we left her office, I felt hollow, like I'd failed some crucial test but wasn't quite sure what it had been. In the elevator down to the parking garage, nobody spoke. The silence was heavy, uncomfortable. Finally, Diane broke it. Eleanor, I know change is hard, especially at your age, but you really need to try to be more trusting. Stephanie is doing her best to help you. At my age, the phrase stung more than it probably should have. Was that how they saw me? As some confused old woman who couldn't understand her own finances? Daniel drove me home without much conversation. When we pulled up in front of my house, he turned to look at me, his expression troubled. Mom, can I ask you something? Is this really about the investments? Or is this about something else? Are you angry with me about something? The question caught me off guard. Why would I be angry with you? I don't know. You just seem like you don't trust me lately. Like you think I'm trying to take advantage of you or something. The hurt in his voice made my heart ache. Daniel, I don't think you're trying to take advantage of me. I just don't understand what's happening with my money, and nobody seems willing to explain it in a way that makes sense. Because you won't listen to the explanations, he said, frustration creeping into his tone. Stephanie spent half an hour walking you through everything, and you still weren't satisfied. What more do you want? I wanted my husband back. I wanted to not feel so alone and confused. I wanted my son to be on my side instead of making me feel like I was the problem. But I couldn't say any of that. I just want to be sure my money is safe. It is safe. It's safer than it's ever been, being professionally managed instead of just sitting in a bank. But you have to trust the people who are trying to help you. After he drove away, I stood in my driveway for a long time, looking at the house Richard and I had made into a home. The roof needed repairs. The paint was peeling in places. The garden I'd so carefully tended was showing signs of neglect. Everything was slowly falling apart, including my relationship with my only child. That weekend, I did something I'd been avoiding. I pulled out all the financial documents I'd received since hiring Stephanie and spread them across my dining room table. Every statement, every contract, every piece of correspondence. Then I went through them line by line, comparing the numbers, checking the dates, trying to make sense of what should have been straightforward. The more I looked, the more discrepancies I found. Small things mostly. Fees that seemed higher than what had been explained to me. Transaction dates that didn't quite match up. Account numbers that appeared on some statements but not others. Individually, each irregularity could be explained away. But taken together, they formed a pattern that made my unease grow. On Monday, I called Janet at the bank again. When she answered, I could hear the concern in her voice immediately. Mrs. Morrison, I've been thinking about you. How did your meeting go with the financial advisor? Not well. I'm more confused than ever, and I think something is wrong, but I can't prove it. Can you help me? We spent the next hour on the phone with Janet walking me through how to identify legitimate investment accounts, how to verify that money was actually where it was supposed to be, how to spot red flags in financial documentation. The more she explained, the more certain I became that I was being stolen from. Here's what I think you should do, Janet said finally. File a complaint with the Securities and Exchange Commission. They investigate financial fraud. And seriously consider consulting with an attorney who specializes in elder financial abuse. Elder financial abuse. The term made me feel sick. That's what this was, wasn't it? Someone taking advantage of an elderly widow who didn't fully understand complex financial instruments. But my son and daughter-in-law work with this advisor too. If she was stealing from me, wouldn't she be stealing from them as well? Janet was quiet for a moment. Not necessarily. These scams often work by having some legitimate clients alongside the victims. The legitimate clients provide cover, make the operation look real. Or, she hesitated, the other clients might be in on it. You think my son is involved in stealing from me? I'm not saying that. I'm just saying you need to consider all possibilities and protect yourself. After I hung up, I sat at my dining room table, surrounded by papers I couldn't fully understand, contemplating a possibility I didn't want to consider. Could Daniel really be part of this? Could my own son be stealing from me? Seemed impossible, unthinkable. But then, 6 months ago, I would have said it was impossible that anyone could steal from me at all. I pulled out my laptop, the one Daniel had given me 2 Christmases ago, and searched for elder financial abuse. The results were overwhelming. Article after article about seniors being scammed, families stealing from elderly relatives, financial advisors defrauding their clients. I read story after story that sounded eerily similar to my own situation. The caring family member who suggested hiring a financial advisor, the professional who seemed legitimate, the complicated explanations that never quite added up, the isolation of the victim, who couldn't access their own money and couldn't get anyone to believe something was wrong. One article mentioned that victims of elder financial abuse often didn't report it because they were embarrassed, or because they didn't want to believe their own family members would hurt them, or because they feared they'd be declared incompetent and lose control of their lives entirely. I understood all of those fears intimately. Admitting I'd been scammed meant admitting I'd been foolish. Accusing Daniel meant potentially losing my only child. Going public with my concerns might result in him and Diane arguing I wasn't capable of managing my own affairs. But staying silent meant losing everything Richard and I had worked for. It meant letting whoever was doing this get away with it, possibly to do it to someone else. I spent the rest of Monday drafting an email to the Securities and Exchange Commission. It took me hours to write, trying to explain clearly what had happened, what my concerns were, what evidence I had. When I finally hit send just before midnight, I felt simultaneously relieved and terrified. There was no taking it back now. Tuesday morning, my phone rang at 7 o'clock. It was Diane, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Eleanor, what have you done?" My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "Stephanie called Daniel last night. Apparently you filed some kind of complaint against her with the government. Do you have any idea how serious that is? You could ruin her career, her reputation, everything she's built. If she hasn't done anything wrong, then she has nothing to worry about." "If she hasn't done anything wrong?" Diane's voice rose. "Eleanor, she's been managing our money for years. Successfully. Do you think we'd keep working with her if she was some kind of criminal? I think I don't understand where my money is, and every time I ask questions, I get evasive answers. You get evasive answers because you don't understand the answers you're given. There's a difference." Diane took a breath, clearly trying to calm herself. "Look, Daniel is devastated. He's been trying to help you, trying to make sure you're taken care of, and this is how you repay him? By essentially accusing him and me of being part of some scam. I never accused you of anything. By accusing Stephanie, you're accusing us. We recommended her. We vouched for her. If she's supposedly stealing from you, then we're either criminals or idiots. Is that what you think of your own son? That he's either a thief or a fool?" I didn't have an answer to that. Because the truth was I didn't know what to think anymore. I loved Daniel desperately, but I also couldn't ignore the evidence that something was very wrong with my financial situation. "I'm protecting myself," I said finally. "That's all I'm doing." "No, you're destroying your family. Do you realize that? Daniel doesn't even want to talk to you right now. He's so hurt by this, by your lack of trust in him." The words hit like physical blows. "Can I speak to him?" "I don't think that's a good idea. Not until you're ready to apologize and drop this ridiculous complaint." She hung up before I could respond. I tried calling Daniel directly, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message, my voice shaking, asking him to please call me back so we could talk. He didn't. For the next week, I heard nothing from Daniel or Diane. My calls went unanswered. The few texts I sent received no response. It was like they'd cut me out of their lives completely, and the silence was agonizing. I'd lost Richard, and now I was losing Daniel too. The house felt emptier than it ever had, the quiet oppressive and suffocating. 10 days after I filed my complaint, I received a call from an SEC investigator named Michael Torres. He had a warm professional voice that immediately put me somewhat at ease. "Mrs. Morrison, I've reviewed your complaint, and I'd like to meet with you to discuss the details. Would you be available this week?" "Yes, of course. Anytime." We arranged to meet at my house on Thursday afternoon. I spent the intervening days organizing all my documentation, creating a timeline of events, writing down every detail I could remember about my interactions with Stephanie. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it thoroughly. Michael Torres arrived exactly on time, a trim man in his 40s wearing a suit and carrying a leather briefcase. He had kind eyes and an unhurried manner that helped me feel less nervous. I offered him coffee, which he accepted, and we settled at my dining room table surrounded by my carefully organized papers. "Mrs. Morrison, why don't you start from the beginning? Tell me how you came to hire Stephanie Chen." For the next 2 hours I walked him through everything. Diane's initial suggestion, my meeting with Stephanie, the paperwork I'd signed, the transfers and transactions I didn't understand, the pension redirect, the meeting where I'd tried to get answers and been dismissed. Michael listened carefully, taking detailed notes, occasionally asking questions to clarify specific points. When I finished, he sat back in his chair, studying me thoughtfully. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm going to be honest with you. What you're describing could be a legitimate, if aggressive investment management strategy, or it could be fraud. The challenge is proving which it is. Can't you just look at the accounts? See where the money actually is? We can and we will. But that takes time. We'll need to get subpoenas, review records, potentially interview other clients. It's a process that can take months, sometimes years." My heart sank. Years? I don't have years. If someone is stealing from me, they're doing it right now, every day. I understand. In the meantime, there are steps you can take to protect yourself. First, revoke the power of attorney you gave Stephanie. That document gives her control over your accounts, which means she can continue moving money around while we investigate. How do I revoke it? You'll need to send her a formal written notice, certified mail, stating that you're revoking her authority effective immediately. I'd recommend having an attorney draft the letter to make sure it's legally sound. You should also change your account passwords, contact every financial institution where you have accounts, and put alerts on your credit. The thought of doing all of that felt overwhelming, but I nodded. What about my son and daughter-in-law? They work with Stephanie too. Should I warn them? Michael's expression became carefully neutral. "That's your decision, Mrs. Morrison. But I will tell you that in these types of cases, family members are often involved, either as co-conspirators or as what we call feeder fish, people who bring in new victims and get a cut of the proceeds. You think my son is helping steal from me. I think your son recommended you to a financial advisor who may or may not be legitimate, and that recommendation resulted in you transferring a substantial amount of money into accounts you can't fully access or verify. Whether your son knew what would happen, I can't say. But you need to protect yourself, even if that means protecting yourself from family." After Michael left, I sat in the growing darkness of my dining room, not bothering to turn on lights as the sun set outside. Everything I'd feared was being confirmed. I'd been scammed. My money was gone or going, and my son might be part of it. The next morning, I called an attorney whose name Janet had given me. Harold Chen, no relation to Stephanie, specialized in elder law and financial fraud cases. He agreed to see me that afternoon, and by the end of our meeting, he drafted a letter revoking Stephanie's power of attorney and outlining my intention to pursue legal action if my funds weren't immediately returned to my control. "I'm going to be honest with you, Mrs. Morrison," Harold said as I prepared to leave his office. "Even if we prove fraud, recovering your money might be difficult. These operations often move funds quickly, hide them in complex structures, sometimes transfer them overseas. The best outcome is usually a partial recovery plus criminal prosecution of the perpetrators. So I might lose everything. You might. I'm sorry, but we're going to fight as hard as we can to prevent that." The letter was sent certified mail on Friday. By Monday afternoon, I received a furious call from Diane. "What the hell are you doing, Eleanor? Stephanie received some legal letter revoking her authority and threatening to sue her. Are you out of your mind? I'm protecting what's left of my money. There's nothing to protect it from. Your money is fine. It's being managed properly. But now you've completely screwed everything up. Stephanie says she can't continue working with clients who don't trust her, which means Daniel and I have to find a new advisor, all because of your paranoia. If everything is legitimate, then she should have no problem returning my money to my direct control. It doesn't work that way. There are procedures, penalties for early withdrawal, tax implications. You can't just yank hundreds of thousands of dollars out of investment accounts on a whim. It's not a whim. It's my money and I want it back. Fine. I hope you're happy. You've destroyed your relationship with your son over nothing. He said to tell you he's done trying to help you. If you want to ruin your own life, go ahead, but leave us out of it. The line went dead. I tried calling Daniel immediately, but his phone was off. I sent a text. Please, Daniel, talk to me. I love you. I'm just trying to protect myself. No response came. That night I barely slept. Every sound in the house made me jump. I kept thinking about Michael Torres's warning about family members being involved, about Harold Chen's pessimistic assessment of my chances of recovering my money. I thought about Richard, about how disappointed he'd be that I'd let this happen, that I'd trusted the wrong people with everything we'd built together. Around 3 a.m, unable to sleep, I went to my computer and started searching for information about Stephanie Chen. I should have done this months ago, before signing anything, but I trusted Diane's recommendation. Now I dug deeper, looking beyond the glossy professional website and the impressive credentials. What I found chilled me. There were reviews buried on obscure websites from other clients who'd had experiences similar to mine. People who'd trusted Stephanie with their retirement funds and then found themselves unable to access their money, given confusing explanations, eventually losing substantial amounts. One review was from a widow in her 80s who'd lost her entire life savings. Another was from a retired veteran who trusted Stephanie with his disability settlement. The reviews had been posted over a span of several years, suggesting this wasn't a new operation. And yet somehow Stephanie was still in business, still taking on new clients, still maintaining her professional reputation. How was that possible? I kept digging and found the answer. Each complaint had been settled quietly, out of court, with non-disclosure agreements that prevented the victims from speaking publicly about what had happened. The reviews I was finding were from people who'd violated those agreements or hadn't signed them, and they'd been buried under positive reviews from what I now suspected were fake accounts. At dawn, exhausted but unable to rest, I called Michael Torres and left a detailed voicemail about what I'd found. Then I called Harold Chen and did the same. By the time the sun was fully up, I documented everything, taken screenshots, saved web pages, created a file that proved Stephanie had a pattern of doing exactly what I suspected she was doing to me. I felt vindicated but also terrified. Because if Stephanie had been doing this for years and getting away with it, what chance did I have of stopping her? And if Daniel and Diane had been working with her all this time, were they victims too? Or were they part of the scam? That afternoon, I received a response from Stephanie's lawyers. A formal letter denying any wrongdoing, accusing me of making false and defamatory statements, and threatening to sue me for damages if I continued to spread lies about their clients' business practices. The letter was clearly meant to intimidate me into silence. It had the opposite effect. Reading their threats made me angry in a way I hadn't been in years. They were counting on me being scared, being confused, being too embarrassed or intimidated to fight back. They thought I was just another vulnerable widow they could steal from in silence. They had no idea who they were dealing with, and neither, I was beginning to realize, did my son. The investigation took 4 months. 4 months during which I didn't hear from Daniel at all, despite my daily messages. 4 months of sleepless nights and mounting legal bills. But Michael Torres was thorough, and what he uncovered was worse than I'd imagined. Stephanie had been running an elaborate Ponzi scheme for 6 years. My money hadn't been invested at all. It had been transferred to shell accounts, then distributed to earlier investors to create the illusion of returns, with substantial amounts siphoned off to Stephanie herself. The accounts she'd shown me, the impressive returns, all fabricated. The worst revelation came during a meeting in Harold Chen's office. Michael Torres sat across from me, his expression grim as he explained what they'd discovered about Daniel and Diane's involvement. "Your son and daughter-in-law were what we call recruiters," Michael said gently. "They received 20% of whatever new money they brought in. Over the past 3 years they'd referred 8 clients to Stephanie. You were the biggest score." I felt the room spin. Daniel knew? He knew she was stealing from me. The evidence suggests yes. We found emails between him, his wife, and Stephanie discussing your financial situation before you ever met with her. They knew exactly how much you had and planned how to get it. My son had sold me out for money. My only child, the boy I'd raised alone, who I'd sacrificed everything for, had deliberately led me into a trap that cost me everything his father had left me. The trial took place 8 months later. Stephanie was convicted of wire fraud, money laundering, and theft. She received 12 years in federal prison. Daniel and Diane pleaded guilty to conspiracy and received 5 years each. At their sentencing, Daniel finally looked at me. Across the courtroom, our eyes met, and I saw something I'd never seen in him before: shame. Real devastating shame. But he said nothing, made no attempt to apologize or explain. He just looked away as the bailiff let him out. I recovered 38 cents on the dollar. Not nothing, but far from everything. The house would have to be sold eventually. My comfortable retirement was gone, but I was still standing. Now I volunteer at a senior center, teaching other elderly people how to spot financial scams, how to protect themselves, how to ask the right questions. I tell my story to anyone who'll listen, hoping to save at least one person from what I went through. People ask if I miss Daniel. The truth is, I miss the son I thought I had. The real Daniel, the one who could sell out his own mother for profit, I never really knew at all. And I've learned that sometimes the most dangerous predators were the most familiar faces. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.